This is Dateline News and Conversation. The topic of the show tonight, the goal of the United States, at least since 1945, when Harry Truman dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki as a warning to Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union. Ever since that time, the United States has been provoking and threatening Russia up until the present day. The topic tonight, America's goal is to destroy Russia. My guest tonight, my good friend, Bruce Gagnon, the coordinator of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space from Brunswick, Maine. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Good to see you, Regis. Good to be back. I just have one thing I have to correct you on. You said that since the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, well, according to Ursula von der Leyen from the EU, unelected leader of the EU, she was a G7 meeting in Hiroshima not too long ago, and she made a speech just a few days ago where she basically blamed Russia for dropping those bombs. Isn't that so? She said that?
Bruce, we're gonna look into all of this tonight, but you can take a statement like von der Leyen, and it is the exact opposite of what is actually happening. These people are trying to rewrite history.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm really happy to have you tonight because you and I go back a ways, and we've discussed these very specific issues and topics that we're going to talk about tonight, really for the first time on social media. I mentioned that these provocations go back decades. I want to go back now just to 1990 or 1991, when Secretary of State at that time to Ronald Reagan promised Mikhail Gorbachev, when the Soviet Union broke up, the Warsaw Pact was dissolved, he promised that NATO would not move 1 inch east towards Russia. Bill Clinton came in, and he almost immediately broke that promise. And NATO has been expanding now to include many of the former Soviet republics and 30 countries now. Bruce, your comments. A lot of people have said, no, that was just a verbal promise. It has been supported many times by the people who are involved. Give me your opinion on that promise and that broken promise.
Well, yeah, it was a real promise made by Secretary of State James Baker, who was working for George Herbert Walker Bush at the time. It's been corroborated by many people, and there's all kinds of evidence that it was indeed made. Of course, the United States, the empire of lies, is always trying to get out from behind, promises that it's made because its promises are worthless over time. Its treaties are worthless over time. Just ask the Native Americans about the Great White Father in Washington's treaties that are always broken. So you're absolutely correct. And since Clinton, what he called NATO Enhancement, I have a picture actually of Clinton surrounded by all these senators and other such people. And they're all bragging about, NATO enhancement, as Clinton called it. And they were all in on the thing. And NATO's been on steroids ever since, moving into all these countries in Eastern Europe, basically encircling Russia, bringing war games to the Russian borders repeatedly over these years, and getting more and more provocative as we go along. So it's, and then on top of that, during the George W. Bush administration, they got rid of the ABM treaty, the anti-ballistic missile treaty that outlawed so-called missile defense systems, which are now deployed in Romania and Poland, those are two NATO members. These systems they call it Aegis Ashore, the same technology that's on Aegis destroyers made at Bath Iron Works near where I live here in Maine. And they can fire two kinds of missiles. One is a first strike attack cruise missile that would reach Russia in minutes. And secondly, they can fire so-called missile defense interceptors. That is the shield. So after the U.S. launches a first strike attack on Russia, Russia tries to retaliate with their remaining nuclear capability. The U.S. would use these so-called interceptor missiles from Poland and Romania to take out their retaliatory strike. So it's always been about U.S. setting in motion, setting in place the first strike capability to take out Russia.
Well, you mentioned the war games. I want to go over some of these war games. You and I both have done quite a bit of research on these things, but the first one that I want to begin with, Bruce, is really a policy. It's Operation Seabreeze, September 11th to the 15th, taking place in Romania. It's to enhance, I'm going to quote this, the capabilities of Black Sea and Partnership for Peace Maritime Security Forces while progressively training and preparing the Ukraine Maritime Command staff. Bruce, the United States, and I think the Congress is about ready to vote on this, a new U.S. Black Sea strategy to enhance their influence in the Black Sea. Bruce, I'm sitting right here on the Black Sea right now in Yalta. I mean, this is Russia's not backyard. This is Russia's sea. To me, Bruce, I mean, I don't know how much more the United States can provoke Russia. And by the way, when people say NATO, I want you to give your thoughts on that as well. NATO is simply the lapdog of the United States. Let's talk about this Black Sea strategy and Russia and America's involvement in all of this.
Well, your word provoke is the right word. You know, think about the United States and Gulf of Mexico, for example, Florida, Texas, that region. What would happen if Russia and China were sticking warships right up into the Gulf of Mexico? Oh, America would go insane. They would launch attacks against them. But we do it, or I shouldn't even say we, because I don't feel like I'm a part of this U.S. machine anymore. But when the U.S. does it, oh, it's fine. It's fine. We're just ensuring the freedom of navigation. That's what they say. But clearly, the strategy is to try to get Russia to knock out one of those warships or one of the planes flying over the Black Sea. That is now helping call in the strikes, these missile strikes into Crimea that are happening almost daily now. So it's so obvious. And I tell you, I'm amazed at Russia's restraint in all of this. They've been absolutely restrained. I don't know how much longer they can keep doing that, though, when the U.S. and NATO are just jamming this stuff right up the throat of Russia. It's really insane.
Yeah,
and we're on the edge of World War III. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and World War III is going to be the last war. It's not going to be a conventional ground war. I'm sure of that. I know you agree. Listen to this. I'm going to read 3 points from this Black Sea strategy. Number one, the Black Sea, and this is in this policy that the United States wants to have approved by Congress. Okay, it's not some reporter writing this stuff. The Black Sea is an active region of strategic competition among the US, Russia, and China. What does America and even China have to do with this competition in the Black Sea? I mean, when you read through this one comment, Bruce, this is not about economic competition. This is a power play. Do you agree?
Yeah, yeah, of course. Of course, China. I haven't heard of China being involved in the Black Sea at all. I mean, they got enough trouble with the U.S. Jamming them up in the Taiwan Straits, and the South China Sea and the East China Sea. So, this is just how the U.S. does it, man. They lie and they lie and they lie some more. And now they're going to pass this law. What they're trying to do is make sure, I'll tell you what's happening with this law. They're trying to make sure that if Biden, or probably Biden's not even going to run for president again, it's probably going to be somebody like California Governor Gavin Newsom. But whoever the Democrat is, if they were to win, they want to make sure they've got them boxed in. Or even if a Republican wins, they want to make sure that they've got boxed in this requirement that they have to go ahead and continue these provocations in the region. That's what they're setting up, to make sure it's a long, ongoing process.
Yeah, and the language they use is incredible. Geostrategic competition. Right now, when you look at what's going on geostrategically, this is all about the United States using force, all of its soft power, to retain its dominance over the world, its unipolar world. But the language they use is geostrategic competition. I mean, you and I both know exactly what that means. It's a competition for the future order and rule of the world. Listen to this second point, Bruce. And it just emphasizes what you were talking about. They want this to become an act, a law, and it seeks to rectify the deficiencies in U.S. policy. Deficiencies. I mean, they want to put in more ships, more airplanes, not only the United States, but NATO countries, because they feel they're not strong enough right now in Russia's Black Sea. It's incredible. Listen to this. The third point, Congress should raise the level of U.S. engagement with allies and bolster its military footprint in the Black Sea region. Bruce, what must Vladimir Putin, his military, and his senior policy strategic advisors, what must they be thinking when they read this? This is public.
Yeah, well, for them, I'm sure they're saying it's just more of the same. It's the modus operandi of the U.S. Continue to create more provocations, more military confrontation, and force reactions. I mean, that's what, like the whole Chechnya war, as far as I'm concerned, that was a CIA operation. They brought in these jihadists to attack Russian people inside of Russia, and then to fight the Russians in Chechnya. And it was all about demonizing Russia, building a case that Russia is bad. Look, it's aggressive, trying to go in Chechnya, and then it was Georgia, now it's Ukraine. And so they're trying to create this picture, this case that Russia is expansionist. It's trying to recreate the Soviet Union. All lies. Every bit of it is lies. You asked me earlier, is NATO a lapdog in the United States? Well, it sure the hell is. And the other thing that drives me nuts is these countries, Romania, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, the whole, throughout the region, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, the leaders of these countries are neocons. And a lot of them, I would say most of them, were installed by George Soros money. A lot of them went to Harvard and Yale. I believe they're likely CIA operatives that were put into power in those countries who were towing the line and essentially giving their country, their national sovereignty over to the United States. And so they've really become little, they are the lapdogs. When you say NATO's the lapdogs, these countries are the lapdogs. And the United States is giving the orders to them, and they do what they're told, even if it means that their own people are in danger, even if it means that their own national budgets are increasingly being militarized, and people in those countries are facing growing poverty and everything else, inflation. They don't care because these people are agents of the United States. It's really pitiful. I have been happy to see just in the last week, I don't know why, maybe I don't understand it enough, don't understand it fully, but Poland has been coming out with some statements criticizing Ukraine, and 3 and 4 different statements, that were really amazing. I'm sure the United States is not happy about that at all, because Poland's kind of going off script a little bit here. They were expected to be one of the first countries to come in and invade Ukraine to help support Ukraine against the evil Russians. And now they're kind of fighting with Zelensky all the time. So it's interesting. I'm not sure the United States is doing as well as it appears they are in the region. I think that the public is growing, increasingly growing wiser in these various Eastern European countries. We're seeing more protests in the Czech Republic, seeing more protests in Germany, for example. So I think Russia's strategy is to try to hold out, try to hang on, deplete Ukraine's ability to wage war against Russia, but at the same time, not go too far with the escalation that it gives the US and NATO another excuse to expand even more. Anyway, I really respect the efforts by the Russian government to try to, continually be open to talking, but at the same time to say that, well, anyway, enough of that.
Well, it's never enough of that. People have got to become aware of what really is happening. Now, you mentioned the United States uses its soft power through USAID, George Soros, the NED, all these other NGOs supposedly go into these countries, and they've been in there for years. Now, I'll just talk about Armenia because I was just there a few months ago, and I'm in daily contact with my friends there, and they are members of the opposition party. What has happened in Armenia is the United States has been there for decades. They even have an American university, a huge facility in Armenia, staffed by and run by United States. The embassy there is enormous. And you and I both know American embassies are full of CIA agents.
Sure.
It just goes with the package, okay?
Absolutely.
They have been disseminating lies and over decades changing the mindset of people, young people, and they get older. They find ones that they can, as you mentioned, send to the United States to get educated at Harvard and Yale. They're influenced by the CIA, by the State Department. Then they come back home and they assume these positions. My friends are telling, there are huge protests, by the way, been going on every day for the last 5 days. I think it's 5 days now. Thousands of people in Yerevan, in the capital. People are getting arrested. The police are coming out, and they're getting even meaner and more violent all the time. But these people are peacefully protesting against this Nikol Pashinyan, who's the prime minister, who they believe has sold the country's soul. And my friends are telling me that the problem is the people there, like everywhere else, the ordinary people are confused. They don't know who or what to believe because the disinformation and the lies have been consistent and daily. Now, we talk about this soft power and people becoming aware of this. There's two friends of mine. Patrick Popel from Austria and Dragana Trivkovic from Serbia, they are working on this, leaving the American sector. In other words, getting out from under American liberal influence. And this is in European countries as well, not just former Soviet republics. And they're trying to inform people about how the United States is operating and has been operating in their countries. And I have only one word for that. It's pernicious. It's been deliberate and well thought out and well planned for decades, really. You mentioned Russia and Russia's patience. I think it's part of the Russian DNA. They're going to wait until the last possible moment before they're going to saddle up and ride. But I have to say this, and I agree with you, there comes a point when Russia will have to saddle up and ride, and that's a very frightening proposition. Medvedev, the former president of Russia, I read it today on RT. He came out and he said, you know what? If NATO wants a war with Russia, we're ready for it, but it'll be the worst war that humanity has ever experienced. He calls out the United States directly. He mentions NATO, a war with NATO, but it's a war with the United States.
Let me comment here a minute. I think that one thing Russia is doing that's really fantastic is they are, as you just said, calling out the US and NATO very publicly at the UN and daily from their spokespersons, from their from their foreign ministry department, from their military department, even from the highest offices, Putin's office. And I love this because they're calling a spade a spade. They're really pointing the finger at the US and calling them out publicly for the world to hear. And so that is really, I think, an important strategy. And I'm sure it's making Washington and Brussels furious because they're doing that. But I think it's very important because they're really shining the light on the demon here. I'm reminded that during the Korean War, MacArthur, remember General Douglas MacArthur? He was the head of the UN's war against North Korea and China, and he wanted to drag Russia into the war, and he sent U.S. military bombers over the border, over Russia's border, because Russia borders Korea, and Vladivostok is just on the other side of the border, and MacArthur bombed Vladivostok, trying to draw Russia into that war. So the U.S. has been after Russia for a long time, and Russia didn't respond. They didn't do anything. And MacArthur was told to back off, by Washington. But this has been the U.S. goal for many, 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 many years. And people don't know about that.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point. The narrative coming from Russia has dramatically changed. Putin always used to refer to our partners in the West and in America, always. And as a result of being betrayed by Germany and by France on the Minsk agreements, and he had to realize that they lied to him. Ever since that time, the narrative from Putin himself and Lavrov and others has dramatically changed to become very aggressive in pointing out the lies that the United States has told, pointing out all of the violations of international law and the UN Charter, pointing out America's wars, unprovoked wars. They talk about all of them: Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. And so you make a good point. But I want to ask you this, because Do you think that this narrative, which Russia is now carrying out on a global scale, is primarily intended for the other countries in the world who now know, and many suspect, what the United States has been up to? How much of this is getting to the ordinary people, Bruce? And do you think that the audience is not even ordinary people, but the governments and countries of the world?
Well, to answer that, first thing that comes to my mind is what's happening in Africa, the way they're expelling the colonial occupier, France in particular, from several countries there in the Sahel region of Africa, the latest being Niger. So I think that the reason why they're feeling empowered to do this at this point in time is largely because they see Russia standing up against the bullies. For the longest time, these countries that have been colonized, whether it's Latin America or the Middle East or African continent, they've really been limited in what they can do to push out these Western colonizers because they didn't have any real strong support at the top, But now with Russia and China really standing up against the West, these other countries are feeling empowered. So I do think these messages are getting through. And I think they're also creeping into European countries and even in the United States. And I can say this with confidence because of recent polling. Polling in the US now shows over 50% of the American people want to stop funding Ukraine. And the same kind of numbers are coming up from countries throughout Europe as well. So I think this is a big deal. But in the end, I think the thing we need to talk more about, besides talking about all the problems and all the dangers and everything else, we have to talk about organizing strategies. And I like to use what we're doing here in Maine as an example, if I can just talk about it for a minute. Since before actually February of 22, we started having statewide protests here in Maine before even Russia went in with the special military operation. And since that time, every single month since then, we've been going to different cities across the state. And Maine is a big state, as you well know. So we've been going north and we've been going south throughout the state and having protests in the bigger communities at the biggest intersections, traffic intersections, where thousands and thousands of cars will pass us by. And we invite people from around the state to come, and they've been very successful. And we've really been, I think, reaching tens of thousands of people over this period of time. In addition, I personally, with just a couple other people in my town, I'm protesting 2 days a week, saying no more money for Ukraine, no war with Russia. So, but just last weekend, there's a big fair called the Common Ground Country Fair. It's very popular. It's kind of an organic fair, and it always gets huge traffic where people are waiting in line for a long time at various intersections in small rural towns. So we went to this one place called Unity, and for 2 hours we were there. And the traffic was bumper to bumper during the entire time. And these are mostly liberals, mostly Democrats that are going to this fair, who largely have supported this Biden administration war on Russia, using Ukraine as the unfortunate proxy and cannon fodder. So we reached a lot of these people, and we're finding slowly but surely these people are coming around because more of this information is leaking out. More people are hearing the voices that are coming from Russia and from opponents of this war throughout Europe. So I think things are changing, but we have to be a lot bolder in our organizing. And the number one thing is not just say, oh, we need a negotiated settlement. We need to talk about stop the funding for the war, because negotiations can take forever as long as the United States is propping up Ukraine with funding and more military equipment. I mean, it's been disclosed in recent days that the U.S. is paying for like 30 or 40,000 bureaucrats inside the Ukrainian government just to keep their government from collapsing right now. So, I mean, the United States is paying for the social security system for Ukraine. Most American people don't know that. So we need to be calling for the end of funding for this war.
Well, Bruce, you made two really good points, and I want to thank you for that example that you and really dozens and dozens of people from around the state of Maine have been doing for the last well over a year. You mentioned organizing, and you and I go back a long ways, and you have always said, and in fact, at the end of your television series was always organized. We've got to get organized. And you and I have talked about this. The problem in the United States is on a national level, there's no organization. There's so many different peace groups. They're all worried about their funding sources. There's a lot of head jobs, different ideologies that people are holding on to that keeps them, and a lot of ego that keeps them from uniting to organize. They were very good at that, many years ago. And the other point,
let me finish. Wait a minute. Let me just add one line here. One of the reasons for that is because many of them are linked to the Democratic Party, and their organizations get funding from the Democrats, from foundations that are part of the Democratic Party. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. The other thing that you mentioned, everybody's saying peace talks. Everybody's coming up with their own peace plan. That is not going to end this conflict, period, because Russia is not going to get involved in any peace talks. That's made that clear. It's the funding. And it's the people in the United States who have no idea where their tax money is going. They have no idea. Their children, their grandchildren are going to be in debt their entire lives, if we even live that long. And what you just said, the United States is pouring billions of dollars into propping up Ukraine as a state, a government, not just a war. It's going into the pockets of Zelensky and his cronies. And the other thing about this funding is that the Democrats and the Republicans are both one party when it comes to war and funding war. And so these issues are never raised, Bruce. They're never raised publicly, except in small groups like yours in Maine and a few other places. By the way, the people in the Netherlands now are rising up and protesting against funding for the war. The people in Germany are rising up in different places. Hungary, Serbia. Well, God, Serbia is worried about another war with Kosovo right now. The United States is ready to bomb the hell out of them again. So I think we cannot emphasize enough this point that you just made. It's not about peace plans. It's not about let's have talks. It's about let's focus on the root cause and where it's all coming from. Don?
Let's be realistic. Russia is in no position to. The U.S. and Ukrainian demands are the same. Russia must surrender. Russia must give back Crimea. Russia must give back the Donbas. Russia's not going to do that. Forget about it. So the U.S. doesn't want negotiations, and Russia is not in a position to negotiate on those terms. And so there will be no negotiations. So it's a wasted breath. It's a wasted strategy right now to be talking about that. Talk about the money. That's what it's all about. The U.S. today has $30 trillion. That's with a T, $30 trillion debt. And Seymour Hersh, the award-winning journalist, has done a story where he talked about Zelensky and his cronies have raked off $400 million of the money that's been sent by the U.S. over there. $400 million has gone into the deep pockets of Zelensky and his cronies. Now that if the American people knew that, it would be they'd be furious. But sadly, the American media is under control of the Democratic Party, the military-industrial complex, and Wall Street, who are all benefiting from this.
All right, we're talking about provocations by the United States against Russia. All of this is part of it. We're talking about the funding for this thing that the American public are not aware of. Even the people in Europe as a whole are not aware of it, but they should be waking up pretty soon because the sanctions have backfired on them. Their economies are all in the tank. Bankruptcies are going out of sight. Inflation is high. They're telling people not to use electricity during parts of the day. It's really incredible. But to get back to these provocations and what it looks like to Russia, I want to just mention some of the more recent war games. And these games are all about planning a first strike attack on Russia, on the land, on the seas, in the air, and as you always point out, and even in space. Here are some of them. Operation Air Defender, June of next year, of this year, 2023, 250 warplanes, including 190 fighter jets, 10,000 troops. And here's another one. Operation Trident Juncture in 2018, at the time, was the largest war game along Russia's border because they're telling people that we're doing this to protect you from Russian invasion. And then there was Operation Saber Strike, 2018. I mean, these are tens of thousands of troops from 19, 20 nations. Operation Cold Response, just last year in the Arctic. You and I have talked about this. My God, when you look at this, these war games are going on in the Arctic, all along Russia's western borders, and they have been going on and will be increasing in the Black Sea. Bruce, I had somebody who told me that I didn't know what the hell I was talking about when I said that these war games were to protect Europe from a Russian invasion. I said, Russia has not invaded anybody. You mentioned the Chechen War, Georgia. Those weren't invasions. Those were fighting off jihadists. Those were trying to protect the local governments. Russia has not invaded any. We're not talking the Soviet Union now. Russia is no longer the Soviet Union. Russia has not invaded anybody. And so, Bruce, as I follow this stuff, and I'm living here, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. When will one of these games be the real thing? How will Russia know? It will only have 4 or 5 minutes to make up their mind and make a decision on, is it real or isn't it? Bruce, how else could Russia be viewing this?
You know, you and I have both been to South Korea. And one thing we know is that in South Korea, they have the U.S. and the South Korean government, South Korean military, which the U.S. controls. The U.S. has total authority over the South Korean military. They have regular war games right up against the border with North Korea. Does North Korea know, is this one real? Is this one live? Is this one a real attack? Or is it just another war game? And it's the same way, as you just said, with Russia. Does Russia know that this time they're not going to come? How do they know? Because, you know, one thing I've learned is that every time the U.S. has these war games and with NATO around Russia, right on Russia's border, they ship over all kinds of equipment, tanks and, you know, artillery, all kinds of stuff, planes, and they leave a lot of them there. In Poland and in Norway, the U.S. military has built 2 big military hubs where they store this equipment after these war games. And so Russia sees this, of course. these are going to be targets if anything ever happens. They're going to just hit those in the early attacks. So it's crazy. The one I want to just refer to is cold response. Cold response was a US-NATO war game on the Norway-Russia border, right there where they come together, very right next to that Russian border. This was in February of 2022, about a week and a half before the Russian special military operation began. So is that ever reported in the mainstream media that one of the reasons why Russia might have initiated this special military operation was not only that the Ukrainian government was hammering and had been hammering the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine, the Russian ethnic region right along the Russian border. They've been hammering them since 2014, killing 14,000 and injuring up to 34,000 or more. But now they're going to have a war game in the Arctic because they want the Arctic. The Arctic ice is melting. Russia's going to be able to drill in that region, and the Western resource extraction corporations, hey, they want that. And don't we know by now that all the US wars are about resources? Every one of them. And so isn't this war about resources too? Can't people see that? The Arctic region is loaded with resources, and the US wants it. And so they got to break Russia up. That's why Biden has called for regime change, getting rid of Putin. And the US has long been talking about restructuring Russia, breaking it up into smaller countries, like they did to Yugoslavia after the US-NATO war on Yugoslavia that broke it up. It's the same story, the same method of operation. Every criminal has an MO. And in this case, the US and NATO are criminal, mobster organizations trying to take out countries so they can grab their resources, whether it's Iraq or Syria or Russia.
Well, in the case of Russia, you're absolutely right. The plan has always been to balkanize it, break it up, because of Russia's vast landmass, but vast natural resources. I mean, people think all it is oil and gas. Baloney. Russia is rich in uranium. Russia is rich in gold and silver, water. Oh my God, Lake Baikal is the largest, I think, cold water lake in the world. There are lakes and forests everywhere. And so, as you mentioned, all of these wars, and I think over history, over time, wars have always been about not only domination and expansion, but extracting the resources from these other regions. And this is another thing that people have got to sooner or later come to realize. And maybe now the Europeans are beginning to realize it. You know, when the United States blew up that pipeline, I know Cy Hirsch said, well, he just got information that it was to hurt Germany and to make sure Germany didn't go back to Russia. Well, you know what? They're smarter than that in the United States. They had two purposes, because they knew damn well this would hurt Russia big time in terms of public relations and money, and it would cripple Germany and therefore the rest of Europe. And so here we're talking about funding, the trillions of dollars that they've wasted on needless, unprovoked wars that have, just since 1945, I've read reports, as many as 20 million innocent people in victim countries have been killed by the United States. It is, you mentioned criminal. They're gangsters. They're mobsters. And Bruce, it's so troubling that the rest of the world cannot get beyond the lie that it's all about freedom and democracy and America's national interests.
Well, you know, a couple months back, I was wondering about all the wars that have been waged against Russia over time. And so I went online and I did a search, and I found several sources that laid out over the past literally 500 years, if you can imagine that, without exception, at least every 100 years, and often more frequently than that, Europe has invaded Russia. whether it was France or Sweden multiple times, Germany, the UK, the United States was involved in the past. There have been efforts to take down Russia, to break it up, to balkanize it, as you said. And so this has been going on for 500 years. That's why the Russians are just like saying, hey, man, we're over this. We're over this. We know what you guys are doing from Europe. We know you want to take everything from us. And we've beaten you repeatedly. We beat Napoleon. We beat Hitler. And now you guys are coming at us again. Well, you know what? If you're an intellectually honest person, you can't deny that history, and you can't deny how that history connects to what's going on today. I mean, it's so damn obvious.
You just said something. Intellectually honest person. Bruce, I've lost so many close, lifelong friends, really smart people, PhDs, master's degrees, influential jobs in the United States. And I've lost them because they have believed, without a shred of doubt, the American lie. Now, I wouldn't dare to call them intellectually dishonest, but it's what they are. These kind of people should understand, when they look at history and they look at the facts, that they have been lied to their entire lives. I'm telling you, this intellectual honesty, this I don't know what it is, delusion. I don't know whether they're asleep, they're not paying attention, or they're afraid. But I think that is the number one problem that we have in the United States and around the world. I'll make this final comment and turn it back to you. You said something so important. Russia's history for at least the last 500 years has been one of invasion and wars by others. It's in their DNA. They know it. And I have to tell you this. I'm hearing it more and more frequently now from Russian people, ordinary people. They narrate this history, and what they believe now, today, 2023, that it is Russia's destiny to save the world from fascism, neo-Nazism, Western liberalism. Take it away.
Last Saturday, when we were in Unity, Maine, this rural town with this massive traffic jam, people trying to get to the Common Ground Country Fair, one guy drove by, crawled by, I should say, because it's bumper to bumper traffic, and he yells out the window, "Everybody knows it." And what he was saying was, we get it, but you know what? And they all know it, because they know our own government is stealing us blind to pay for this war, but people are afraid to say anything about it. Your friends that you were just talking to, I think the biggest problem with most people in this Western world is this quest for upward mobility, what we call the American dream, right? Be successful, rise up, make more money, get a bigger house, get a better car, put your kids through the most expensive colleges, play at the most expensive golf course, have your dinner parties with all your liberal friends where you talk about what you just read in the New York Times. That's what everybody aspires to, especially quote unquote professional people, highly educated people. They're in that world. They were all trained in that world. And for them to now come out and say, United States is doing this terrible thing, trying to start World War III with Russia and China, that's crazy. They can't do that, because it means that they will be literally thrown out of that upward mobility American dream. And so the power of that upward mobility trumps, if I can use that word, trumps the truth. They know it in their heart of hearts, but they can't admit it, because if they do, they'll pay a social price. Social control in the United States is beyond anything. Years ago in the 80s, in the 1980s, when I was organizing in Florida, when I lived in Orlando, Florida, I sponsored, at that time, the Soviet Union still existed. I sponsored a tour of Soviet citizens from Georgia. And these were professional people, doctors and lawyers, other such people. And they came to Orlando for several days. We took them to hospitals. We took them to the Orlando Sentinel newspaper. And I'll never forget, we were walking down a hallway in the Orlando Sentinel newspaper. They were getting the tour. And at one point, the Russian, one of the Russians, the Soviets rather, from Soviet Georgia, turned to this person from the newspaper and said, I must say, I must really admit, you Americans have really developed an unbelievable ability for social control. It's really, you're really quite amazing. And that's the story. That's the story. The United States and the West, because of the media control and the consolidation of the message in the churches, in the schools, in the universities, on TV, in the newspapers, everywhere you go, social control, the message is under control. And even if you're out of line and you're on YouTube, you can get canceled in a minute, thrown off if you're telling the truth. This is what keeps it all going. And people know this, and they don't want to lose their job or lose their position in society because of it. That is what we're fighting more than anything else.
Yeah. Social control. We're experiencing it right now with the internet and social media platforms canceling people, including myself. YouTube canceled me last year. I have many friends who cannot return to their European countries because they've been reporting on the special military operation in Ukraine and in the Donbas. Their legal charges have been brought against them. Their bank accounts have been frozen. So when you talk about control, it's gone to another level now where it's including violence on people. They kill people. And they use the law against them to silence them. I mean, it is unbelievable.
It's fascism. Mussolini, World War II, Mussolini, the fascist leader of Italy, his definition of fascism was the wedding of corporations and government. Well, that's exactly what we have in the United States and in Europe today. It's fascism.
Yeah, it is fascism. And I think we have to call it what it is and not use any kind of fancy terms, Western liberal values. I think we got to call it exactly what it is, fascism. All right. I want to, with the time we have left, this has been really another one of our fascinating discussions.
People don't know that when you lived in Maine, when you were still here, you're from Maine, and this is where we met. We worked together for a long time. People don't know that you and I used to sit around and have these discussions back and forth, yelling and shouting and everything else all the time. So this is kind of a reunion for you and me, isn't it?
Yeah, this is Bruce and Regis 2.0 from Russia with love. All right. The whole point of this was what the United States has had as a goal is to break up Russia, steal its resources, destroy the country. And now they come right out and say, we got to get rid of Putin and we got to break it up into smaller pieces. But we've been talking about the threats and the provocations. We talked about the broken promises. We've talked about these annual, increasingly larger war games completely surrounding Russia. We haven't talked much about the special military operation, the war in Ukraine. But it is all, when they say funded, they're not just sending money there. They've been sending tanks. They've been sending cluster bombs, missiles with cluster bombs. They've been sending mines and
depleted uranium.
depleted uranium, the cluster bombs, depleted uranium, and they have been attacking now deep inside of Mother Russia. They've even attacked the city of Moscow. They attempted an attack on the Kremlin. They've hit the business center, a magnificent complex of high-rise buildings, a couple of times with drones. They've hit Russian bases. They have attacked and have been attacking Crimea almost on a daily basis. They've hit the bridge twice. They've been repulsed dozens of times, at least from the reports we get. The city of Sevastopol has been under attack multiple times. But Bruce, just last week, I don't know, to me, it's close to Russia's final red line. A British Storm Shadow long-range missile struck the naval headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol. We were there just a few days ahead of that. I was right at that exact location. This has got to be, Bruce, I don't know how they could provoke Russia anymore, but now the United States is talking about sending these other longer range missiles to Ukraine. Putin has let the United States know that if Russia comes under threat, now I think it's under threat already, but a threat to destroy it, that first strike attack, final attack, Russia will unleash the full force of its nuclear arsenal. Bruce, do you think that the use of this Storm Shadow, and there's been others, they've shot down others, it's not the only one. Do you think that this could be the straw that breaks the camel's back?
Well, let me say this, that I know for a fact that it would not be possible for Ukraine to fire these drones and these long-range missiles that they're receiving from Britain and the United States and from other European countries. They wouldn't be able to fire them and hit targets deep inside of Russia without the U.S. providing the coordinates, directing these missiles and drones to their targets with space technology. We know for a fact that Elon Musk's Starlink satellites are providing the coordinates for these attacks, and other U.S. military satellites are being used for that purpose as well. So the U.S. is playing a direct role, and Russia has called them out on that repeatedly in recent weeks and months as they've escalated deeper and deeper inside of Russia. It's always been my understanding that Russia has said that they would never use nuclear weapons first. China has said the same thing. The U.S. refuses to say that, by the way. And that Russia has always said they would only use nuclear weapons if they were attacked by nuclear weapons or if their country faced existential threat. Now, what exactly does existential threat mean to the Russian government and Russian military? I don't know the exact definition. But if the United States continues to escalate the way they are, we might be reaching that point sooner than we think. So let's don't wait till we get to that point. Let's recognize that our children and our grandchildren's future on this planet and all life on this planet, literally, animal life and plant life and everything else, could be just incinerated by nuclear weapons. And we can't let this happen. And so people need to ask themselves, what's more important, my social standing in my clique, in my community, or the future of life on this planet Earth? I mean, to me, that's really the question. What's the most important job of a human being? Oh, having the best business card that I could brag about, or having the life for the next 7 generations. People need to get real, man. Come around and wake up.
You know, I was hoping that this threat and this imminent threat, it's more imminent than it's ever been before, of a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. We've never been closer. I mean, it scares the bejesus out of me. But I want to make one final point, and then I'll let you have the last word. You mentioned about the United States involved in the coordinates and using space and Elon Musk's Starlink system, blah, 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 blah. It's well known for some time that United States, Canada, Germany, and other countries have boots on the ground. Just this week, the Russians blew up a German, whatever it is, Leopard 1 tank. Inside was a German crew in uniform.
They were dressed in Ukrainian uniforms.
In Ukrainian uniforms.
But they were all Germans. And one guy was, I put a story on my blog about this. One of the guys was still alive when the Russians went into the tank, and the rest were dead. And he told them that they were all German troops from this certain brigade, German brigade, and that they were told to wear Ukrainian uniforms. So yeah, I think it's been happening for this entire war. There have been all kinds of US, NATO officers and military people. There's a lot of these guys that are working for X, Y, and Z Weapons Corporation that come there to show the Ukrainian troops how to fire these various technologies. And I'm sure they're in the middle of the fighting, and they have been all along. And I'm sure many of them have been dying.
Bruce, it's a very difficult situation the entire planet is in. And meanwhile, as this conflict is going on in Ukraine and the threats on Russia's security, on a geopolitical level, things are moving really fast and moving in a direction away from United States influence. I think if there's any hope, it lies in this now global shift, and the vast majority of the world has shifted away from United States influence. The final word goes to you.
Well, everything you said is true, and it's really revealing the U.S. and European colonial powers, 500 years of control, of colonization, grabbing resources. They built their own economies in Europe and the United States based on these stolen resources. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. The world is rising up and saying no more. And US and Europe are desperate. They're desperate to hang on to power. That's why they're doing so many things in Armenia and Moldova and Azerbaijan and Georgia, other places around Russia's border. They're trying to work and build many war fronts for Russia. But in the end, I think they're going to fail. They're going to fail because history is revealing the evil nature of this plan by the West. And I don't think they're going to succeed. And let's just hope they're not insane enough to go nuclear. Let's hope they still love their own families, if you will, and don't want to see them die. Pray to God.